It was supposed to be a peaceful evening for the Carter family. But, in a matter of seconds, their world was turned upside down. When 10-year-old Jason heard sirens outside his home, he didn't know they were for his father, a respected detective who had just been targeted in a brutal drive-by shooting. Critically injured, his father's survival became a race against time while the rest of the family was forced into hiding. As fear set in and threats loomed larger, their once normal lives were shattered. This emotional true story captures the chaos, the trauma, and the strength it took for one family to survive a year that felt like a lifetime. Watch the full episode to uncover how danger doesn't always knock. Sometimes it comes without warning. The evening of July 12, 2019 began like any other for the Carter family. The air was warm, a summer breeze moving through the trees outside their two-story home in suburban Memphis. Inside, dinner was winding down, dishes clinking softly in the sink, and the hum of cartoons played from the living room where 10-year-old Jason Carter sat cross-legged on the floor, half watching while fiddling with a toy car. His older sister Kayla scrolled on her phone nearby, earbuds in, lost in music. Their mother, Erin, moved through the house in that familiar, unconscious rhythm of routine, checking locks, folding laundry, preparing for another ordinary night. But ordinary was about to end. It happened fast. The sound didn't register at first, not as danger. A loud bang, then another, and then the unmistakable stutter of rapid gunfire echoing through the quiet streets. Jason stood up, confused, walking toward the front window where blue and red lights were beginning to flicker across the glass. Erin was already moving, rushing to pull him away as sirens screamed louder, closer, stopping not far from their house. Less than a block away, a dark sedan had come to a stop in the middle of the road. Its windshield shattered, driver's door open, man collapsed across the steering wheel. Detective Marcus Carter, husband, father, decorated member of the Memphis Police Department. And now, barely clinging to life after being ambushed in a targeted drive-by shooting just minutes after leaving the precinct. Back at the Carter house, the phone rang. Erin answered, expecting Marcus on the other end to say he'd forgotten something, that he was running late, that he'd be home soon. Instead, it was a voice from the department, calm, controlled. There's been an incident. We need you to come with us now. Erin froze, and in that moment, everything fractured. The ride to the hospital was silent except for the voice of the officer driving, who offered only short reassurances and vague phrases that meant nothing but made everything feel worse. Erin sat in the back seat with both kids, one arm wrapped around Jason's trembling shoulders, the other gripping Kayla's hand so tightly that both their knuckles turned white. No one cried, not yet. They were caught in that stillness that only comes after something unthinkable, when the mind refuses to catch up with reality. Outside the window, the city blurred past them, streetlights flickering. Terror, intersections flashing yellow. The nighttime calm of Memphis now shattered by something none of them could explain. When they arrived at the trauma center, uniformed officers were stationed at the entrance. Their faces were grim, eyes low, posture tense. One of them nodded to the officer who had driven them there, and without a word, Erin was escorted inside, her children taken to a separate waiting area. She wanted to protest, to keep them close, but the look in the officer's eyes stopped her. This wasn't a request, it was protocol. And it meant that whatever had happened was more than serious, it was dangerous. Inside the emergency bay, the fluorescent lights buzzed, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air. Doctors moved quickly, nurses spoke in short commands, and behind a thick curtain. Erin caught a glimpse of Marcus's facepal, bloodied, breathing shallow through a ventilator. Tubes ran across his chest. Monitors beeped out the rhythm of a life hanging by threads. The lead trauma surgeon explained that Marcus had been hit 3 times, once in the shoulder, once in the upper chest, and once in the lower abdomen. The shot to the chest had punctured a lung. The abdominal wound had caused significant internal bleeding. It stopped at 4 now, but the next 24 hours would be critical. Erin didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She could see it in their faces. This was a fight, and Marcus wasn't out of danger yet. Back in the waiting area, Jason kept asking the same thing. Is Daddy okay? And Kayla, older but still just a child, didn't answer. She sat in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, headphones in, but no music playing. Just silence. Just shock. The waiting room was filled with murmurs, other families, other emergencies. But for the Carters, time had stopped. Meanwhile, back at the scene, detectives were combing the street. The car Marcus had been driving was riddled with bullets, shell casings scattered along the pavement. Witnesses described hearing the squeal of tires, a dark SUV speeding away, headlights off. No license plate, no clear direction, no security cameras on the street. It looked clean, it looked professional. And for the first time in his long career, the Memphis PD had to accept a chilling truth: one of their own had been hunted. The deeper the detectives went into Marcus Carter's recent cases, the more tangled the web became, because the attack wasn't just a warning, it was a message. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it was received loud and clear. Detective Carla Dunham knew Marcus better than most. They'd spent years working homicide together, watched each other grow into seasoned investigators, survived politics, grief, burnout. She knew Marcus as principled, methodical, the kind of officer who did things by the book even when it put him in harm's way. And that's exactly what worried her now, because following the book didn't just make you predictably, it made you vulnerable. As she and Detective Ray Howell traced the digital footprint behind the unauthorized access to Marcus's personnel file, they discovered it wasn't just a one-time breach. Whoever had slipped in had done it twice, once to pull Marcus's shift calendar, and again to access a report that Marcus had filed 3 weeks before his shooting. It wasn't a big case. On paper, it looked routine. A follow-up investigation involving a suspicious warehouse out on the east end of the city. One anonymous complaint, one scheduled inspection. But what stood out was the report Marcus submitted afterward. It was vague, overly brief, and unusual for someone as detail-oriented as him. No follow-up, no evidence logged. Just one paragraph that said, "No further action required." That didn't sit right with Carla. She remembered Marcus mentioning something about that warehouse a few weeks earlier. He had said it felt wrong. There were too many people hanging around with no clear reason. Too many unmarked vehicles coming and going after hours. But now, there was no trace of that concern in the official file. Either he'd changed his mind or he'd been told to back off. They pulled traffic cam footage from the area around the warehouse in the days leading up to the shooting, and that's when the first real break surfaced. At 11:43 p.m., just 5 nights before Marcus was ambushed, a dark SUV with a damaged left taillight was captured circling the block near his home. The same vehicle showed up again the next night. Then again 2 days later, always late, always slow, always circling. It was the same pattern used in surveillance runs before a hit. But here's what made it worse. The plates were missing in every shot. That SUV was never meant to be identified. Whoever was inside had gone to lengths to erase the trail. But they'd missed something. The vehicle had a sticker in the rear window, faded, barely visible, but still distinct. A local tow company's logo, one that had gone out of business the year before. Carla had seen that sticker before. She just didn't know where. She called in favors, pulled surveillance from local businesses near Marcus's home, and finally found what she needed. Grainy footage from a gas station 2 blocks from the Carter house. The SUV had stopped there the day before the shooting. The passenger had stepped out for less than a minute, just enough time to buy a pack of cigarettes, and for a brief second, the camera caught his face. Carla stared at the screen for hours, replaying it over and over. It wasn't Luis Vega. It wasn't anyone from the Ruiz case. It was someone else, someone she didn't expect. The man in the video was Roy Delson, a former narcotics officer who had worked 2 precincts over. He had been suspended 18 months ago for misconduct involving evidence tampering and had quietly resigned before the case could go public. Rumor had it that Marcus had helped build the case that got him pushed out. Now, Delson was back in the city. And suddenly, this wasn't just about retribution from a gang. It was about something deeper, personal. The kind of grudge that waits quietly, planning in the dark. Detective Carla Dunham watched the grainy surveillance footage on a loop, her instincts locking in with each pass. The face was clear enough to freeze her and place Roy Delson, no doubt about it. It had been nearly 2 years since she'd last seen him, but she remembered the bitter final months of his time on the force like it was yesterday. Delson hadn't just fallen from grace, he had imploded. Multiple internal complaints, rumors of off-the-books informants, and a growing suspicion that he was tampering with case files and stashing evidence for his own gain. When Marcus Carter had flagged the inconsistencies and pushed for an internal investigation, Delson's days were numbered, and he knew exactly who to blame. The official story was that Delson resigned quietly under pressure, walked away before the disciplinary board could take further action, but the truth, as Carla remembered it, was messier. He didn't just leave, he burned every bridge on the way out. There were whispered threats in the hallways, loaded stares at roll call. In one tense confrontation in the parking lot, where he told Marcus, "You just made the worst mistake of your career." No one reported it. It didn't seem necessary at the time. But now, that sentence echoed with a new kind of menace. With Delson identified in the gas station footage near Marcus's home, Carla pulled his last known address and began digging into financials, vehicle registrations, any sign that he'd resurfaced in the area. What she found was an eerie digital quiet. No bank activity in months, no registered vehicle, no employment records. It was like he had vanished. Until, that is. She found a utilities account opened under an alias Ronnie Dawson at a small rental property on the outskirts of Shelby County. The lease had started just 6 weeks earlier, paid in cash. No references, no social media, no noise. Carla and her partner, Detective Howell, visited the property under the pretense of a welfare check. The landlord, a middle-aged man who barely looked up from his crossword, told them the tenant kept to himself. Always wore a hat, sunglasses, paid on time, didn't say much. But when asked if he owned a dark SUV, the landlord nodded. "Yeah, kinda beat up. Has that old towing company sticker on the back window?" It was all the confirmation they needed. They didn't approach the door. The day protocol required surveillance first, backup, a warrant. They left, but the chill stayed with them. Back at the department, Carla ordered round-the-clock surveillance on the property. Meanwhile, she took the risk of briefing Aaron Carter, limited details only, but enough to let her know they were closing in on a suspect. And that this wasn't some random act of street violence. Aaron didn't cry. She didn't panic. She listened, stone still, as Carla laid it out. When Carla finished, Aaron looked her dead in the eye and said, "Then he wasn't just trying to hurt Marcus. He was trying to break all of us. And he nearly had." Jason hadn't slept through the night in weeks. Every sound outside the window jolted him awake. He had stopped asking when his dad would come home and instead just sat quietly at the edge of his bed, drawing the same picture over and over again, a police badge with a heart in the center. Kayla barely spoke at all. She stared at her phone for hours, scrolling through photos of her father, replaying old voicemails just to hear his voice. The family was surviving, but just barely. And the thought that the man responsible had once worn the same uniform as Marcus, that betrayal cut deeper than any wound. The surveillance team parked 2 blocks away from the rundown rental where Roy Delson had been hiding. The house sat low behind a patchy, overgrown hedge, with its curtains drawn shut at all hours and a worn-out satellite dish barely clinging to the roof. For 4 days, detectives rotated shifts from unmarked vehicles, watching for patterns, for movement, for signs of life behind the dusty blinds. He didn't leave often. When he did, it was always at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., gloved hands, hat pulled low, never visiting the same place twice. Once to a corner store, once to a garage, once to the edge of the industrial rail yard. Always alone, always looking over his shoulder. Carla Dunham's gut told her that they didn't have much time. Delson wasn't hiding, he was planning. People like him didn't vanish to escape justice. They vanished to regroup, to retaliate. And with the way he'd carefully erased his tracks, it was clear he'd had help. The surveillance footage, the tampered department records, the stolen files. It wasn't the work of someone acting out of impulse. It was strategic, tactical, which meant that Marcus Carter's shooting wasn't just an act of revenge. It was the opening move in something larger. Back at the department, the data analysts confirmed Carla's fears. Hidden inside a wiped USB drive recovered from a dumpster behind the warehouse Marcus had investigated before the attack was a folder marked with initials only a few on the force. Would recognize MC, followed by a list of addresses, shift rotations, and personal schedules for at least 4 other officers. Each of them had once been involved in disciplinary actions or testimony that led to Delson's internal review. Each of them had unknowingly walked into the same kind of risk Marcus had. This wasn't just a grudge, it was a hit list. Carla called an emergency meeting with the chief in internal affairs. The plan was clear. They had to bring Delson in quietly, cleanly, and without alerting anyone inside the department who might still be feeding him information. That meant no radios, no patrol chatter, no backup that wasn't vetted, and it had to happen fast. Just before dawn on July 29th, nearly 3 weeks after Marcus Carter was shot, Carla and her team made their move. A 6-person entry unit surrounded the rental home in complete silence. No lights, no sirens. Just the sound of boots crunching against gravel. They breached the door at 5:18 a.m., expecting chaos. But inside, they found something worse: stillness. The house was empty, mattress on the floor, half-eaten food on the table. The back window open, the screen cut from the inside. Delson was gone, again. But he hadn't left empty-handed. On the wall, scrawled in black marker across a piece of cardboard taped above the kitchen sink, were 6 words that made Carla's stomach drop. "You should V left it buried." That was the moment they realized Delson hadn't been working alone. He had helped someone inside, someone still feeding him information. And now, with his list in hand, he was planning his next move. The empty house was colder than it should have been, the morning sun beginning to rise through the shredded blinds as Carla Dunham stood silently beneath the message Delson had left behind. "You should have left it buried." 6 words that confirmed what her instincts had been screaming since the beginning. This was NT just revenged for a ruined career. Delson had uncovered something. Something buried deep inside the department, and Marcus Carter had come dangerously close to exposing it. Back at headquarters, the mood shifted from urgency to alarm. The list found on the wiped USB stick had 5 more names: officers and detectives who had, at one point or another, crossed paths with Delson's misconduct cases. Some had been part of the investigation, others had testified, and all of them had remained in Memphis, continuing their careers like Delson's chapter had been closed for good. Carla knew they weren't safe, not anymore. The chief authorized immediate protective detail for each of them, but the logistics were tense. Not everyone trusted the department's internal channels anymore. If Delson had someone inside leaking information, then nothing they planned over official systems could be guaranteed safe. That's when Carla took matters into her own hands. One by one, she began calling the officers herself on burner phones, giving each of them only what they needed to know: stay alert. Don't follow normal routines, and be ready to relocate until they understood the full scope of the threat. While the team worked to track Delson's next move, Carla doubled back to an older case file: a buried IA report from nearly 4 years ago. One that had first flagged Delson's behavior during an operation in West Memphis. At the time, he had been running surveillance on a known arms dealer, but evidence had gone missing from the chain of custody. The report was vague, full of redactions, and ended with a quiet dismissal due to insufficient findings. But attached to the file was a name Carla hadn't seen before: Deputy Ryan Adler, a junior officer who had filed the original complaint, before suddenly transferring out of the department. She tracked Adler down in Nashville, where he now worked private security. When Carla approached him, he hesitated at first. "I shouldn't talk about any of this," he said, glancing over his shoulder. Delson wasn't working alone back then. I think everyone knew that, but nobody wanted to be the one to say it. Carla pushed. She needed names, connections, anything. After a long pause, Adler finally whispered a name she had feared all along: Captain Mitchell Dean. Captain Dean was NT, just a superior officer. He was the one who had assigned Marcus to the warehouse detail. He was the one who had quietly closed multiple internal reports. And now Adler was saying that Dean had a long history of looking the other way. When it came to Delson's conduct, the connection felt too dangerous to be coincidental. Back in Memphis, Carla reviewed every case where Dean and Delson's names overlapped. One case in particular stood out: a weapons seizure that had gone off the books. where the number of firearms recovered didn't match the initial count. The paperwork was clean, signed off by Dean himself. But there was no photographic evidence, no entry logs, nothing but a final summary report that simply stated no anomalies. Marcus had referenced this seizure in his private notes months ago, questioning the numbers. That's when it hit. Carla Marcus had found something. The warehouse he visited wasn't just suspicious because of foot traffic. It was likely a holding point, a stash site. One that someone high up had been using to move confiscated weapons back into the black market. And Marcus had gotten too close. Delson Hadan T-shot him just out of personal revenge. He had done it to stop him from pulling on a thread that would VA unravel the department. Now, with Delson on the move and a high-ranking official possibly working against them from within, Carla knew time was slipping away. This wasn't just about protecting 5 names on a list. This was about exposing a rot that had been allowed to grow inside the walls of law enforcement, quietly, strategically, over years. In the weeks that followed, the Memphis Police Department launched a full-scale internal investigation. Captain Mitchell Dean was placed on administrative leave as mounting evidence, some of it unearthed by Marcus. Carter himself pointed to a cover-up that had lasted years. Carla Dunham testified before a state oversight committee, risking her badge and her future to make sure the truth was brought into the light. And eventually it was. Roy Delson was found 2 states away, hiding under an alias, preparing what investigators believed could have been a second wave of attacks. He was arrested without incident, but not without consequence. The trial would come later. The headlines would follow. But for the Carter family, the moment that mattered most came quietly in a hospital room. With the steady beep of a heart monitor and the hand of a father finally gripping back after weeks of silence, Marcus survived. He would never walk the same. He would carry scars no one could see, but he lived. So did his family. They had faced the unthinkable ambush, fear, betrayal from within the very institution meant to protect them. But they stood together day after day, rebuilding, just holding on to hope and fighting for the truth, not just for themselves, but for every family who has lived through the shadow of violence and come out the other side changed. Because sometimes the danger doesn't come in through the front door. Sometimes it's already inside. And when the night comes that changes everything, all you have left is what and who you fight for. Thank you for watching this full true story. If it moved you, if it made you think, or if you believe stories like this need to be heard, please take a moment to like the video, leave a comment, and share it with others. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. Because some stories are more than stories, they're reminders of how fragile life can be and how strong we must be to protect it.